Hello and welcome to video lecture for Accounting 2301. Today we're going to be taking a look at some problems from Chapter 10. This chapter is about standard costing, managerial control tool, and we'll be working through some of the exercises at the end of the chapter, mostly focusing on calculating variances. And it's important to note from the lecture, hopefully everyone remembers that variance analysis is an important tool for companies. It helps them to recognize which parts of the companies are contributing to net income as expected and which are not, and whichever portions are not contributing as expected may or may not need more attention. So let's jump in here. The first exercise we're going to take a look at is exercise 26. And the way we've got the screen set up, we'll have on the left-hand side here the actual book problem, so we can kind of take a look at what we're being asked. And on the right-hand side, we have handwritten solutions to the problems that we can take a look at. So jumping in this first exercise, 1026, we can jump down and see what we're going to be asked to compute. The first is standard hours allowed, and the next is standard number of kits and cabinets. So if we think to our equations, we know that the standard hours is going to be the unit labor standard times the actual output. So we'll first want to take a look at the problem and see if we have the necessary information. So if we see here for direct labor, we do have the unit labor standard. Told here material and labor standards are given in this table. So we bring this 5 into our equation. And then we're going to be looking for the actual output. And if we look at the actual question here, we're told the volume of the output. So from there, it's a simple multiplication, and we see that it's 37,500 hours. Next up, the standard number of kits and cabinets allowed for a volume, again, of 7,500 rebuilt units. In this particular instance, we have two types of direct material, so we'll want to calculate each one of those out separately. You can see here we have direct material for a recon kit, we'll just call that kit, and also direct material for a cabinet. And in this particular instance, they both have the same unit quantity standard. You can see it's one recon kit, one cabinet, and again the volume, the actual output is 7,500. So looking at the calculations here, it's the same for both types of direct material. It's just our one unit quantity standard times the actual output. So it'll be 7,500 kits and also 7,500 cabinets. We can now take a look at the third item that we're asked for. So we're told during the first month of the year, 3,750 standard hours were allowed for the units rebuilt, and we're asked how many units were rebuilt during the first month. Now, in this particular instance, it's kind of a mix-up on the first two questions here. We're not given the units produced, so essentially we're not given the actual output for the equation. So we can go ahead and plug in what we do know and solve for the actual output. So we know that the standard hours is 3,750. That's what we're told in the problem. So we can plug that in the left-hand side of our equation. We also know that the unit labor standard is 5. We can either, again, look back to this table, or we can remember that in the first problem here, we use that unit labor standard of 5. And the missing link here, the missing piece in our equation, is the actual output. So we can just divide both sides of the equation by 5. And we see the actual output is 750 units. So the third part here is a nice illustration. You wouldn't necessarily always have to know really any of these components here in the equation. As long as you have two of the three, you can always solve for the missing piece of the puzzle. Next up, we'll take a look at exercise 10-28, and I'll go ahead and expand this out here so we can take a look at the whole problem and see what we're being asked for before we start our computations. So 10-28, we're asked to refer to information for Bolsa Corporation, and if we scroll up, we see that that information is given here. And what this is, the corporation produces high-quality leather belts. They have a plant in Boise, which may be interesting, maybe not. They're using a standard costing system, and they've set the following standards. So we know everything in this table here is the information we will need for standards. We're also told that during the first month, the plant produced 40,000 belts, and we're given some information about the actual costs as well. So if we take a look and see what the problem is actually asking us for, first up, we're going to compute the cost of leather and direct labor that should be incurred for the production of the 40,000 leather belts. So we can take a look here at the solution, start moving through these. So first off, we can take a look at the materials. And if we think about what this should actually cost, we know that we're trying to produce 40,000 belts. We know that the material cost, looking back to this table, is $12 per belt. So we can just take a simple multiplication there, and we arrive at 480,000 for the materials. Next up, if we look at the labor, same type of calculation, 40,000 units. Looking back to our table, we see that direct labor in this case is $9. So again, just multiply this out, and we see that the labor is 360,000. So just some simple multiplication for the first part here. What should be incurred? Again, materials 480,000, labor 360,000. Next up, we're asked to compute the total budget variances for material and for labor. So moving back to the solution here, we can think back to our equations, and we know that the total variance is equal to the actual cost minus the planned cost. So just for visual ease, went ahead and put this into a little table. You could of course solve this out just using two separate equations. The planned costs for both items we've already calculated in the first part of this problem here. So just move these values down into the planned cost column. For the actual cost, if we're thinking back to the problem here, this is where the actual costs that were highlighted earlier will come into play. So the actual leather purchased, 125,000 strips at $360 per strip. You can see down here for material, just multiplied that out. We see that it's 450,000. So following the materials out, we have the actual cost, we have the planned cost. The difference between these two is going to give us our variance. And in this case, we see that the actual 450 is less than the planned cost, 480. So in this case, our variance is favorable. And I've notated that at the bottom here. Definitely something to keep in mind as you're moving through these problems to understand the difference between favorable and unfavorable variances. Next, we can take a look at the labor. And again, we're given information in the problem. It tells us actual direct labor is 34,000 hours, and the rate is $12.50 per hour. Back to our solutions, just multiply this out. See that it's 425,000. Now have the final value for the table that we're trying to complete. And for the labor, we just look at the difference between the actual cost and the planned cost here. And we see that the variance is 65,000. In this case, it's an unfavorable variance. If we look to our actual, we see that that's greater than the planned cost. So that again is an unfavorable variance.